Hey, I'm Luke Burgis, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Boy, oh boy, this conversation has been a long time in the making. I've wanted to have it, I get to have it, and it's all about the desire of having this conversation that led it to come to life. There was nothing going to stop me from talking to Luke Burgis about his book, Wanting: The Power of Mimetic Desire in Everyday Life. We get into the idea of need versus want. We get into one of the things you can do to kind of stave off the power of mimetic desire, so you don't end up doing things you don't want to do. There's so many things we get into. We could have talked for far longer, but here's what we did talk about. Listen to it. Here's our productive conversation, my productive conversation with Luke Burgis. Here you go. Luke, thanks for taking the time to join me today and have a productive conversation with me, one I've been looking forward to having for a long time.
Me too. Thanks for having me on, Mike.
The book is called Wanting: The Power of Mimetic Desire in Everyday Life. I'm going to do a rote question right out of the gate because some people are going to go, what is mimetic desire?
So mimesis or mimetic is a fancy word for imitate. It comes from the Greek word that means to imitate. Think mimic when you hear that. And it means that we mimic the desires, or we imitate the desires of other people, usually without knowing it, usually while convincing ourselves that our desires are entirely sort of manufactured out of some secret desire chamber inside of ourselves, when in fact the nature of desire is social. And we're always taking cues about what other people want, and it shapes our perception of value. It shapes our very desires as well.
Okay, so right out of the gate, I want to get into impostor syndrome, because I think that nature can really lead towards this concept of imposter syndrome, which is not just a concept, it's a legitimate thing. So if someone is struggling with it, and of course you go through, a bunch of tactics in the book as well. Like there's 15, there's 15 tactics in the book, right out of the gate, but it's a deep read, to the point where I even admitted, fully transparent, that I'm still working my way through it. Imposter syndrome. What does mimetic desire? How do those things? First off, how does it affect it? And secondly, if someone knows this, how do they kind of counteract it? Because I think that it can be a very, very powerful force that can really paralyze people.
Well, the first thing to understand about imposter syndrome is that we're always projecting things onto the people or groups that are making us feel like an imposter that simply aren't true. We're ascribing all kinds of qualities of being and superpowers, and imagining that these are not people that have problems that we don't even know about, right? And they may be doing the same thing to us. It's funny. Simon Sinek told a funny story of a fellow author that he felt like he was a real rival to, and he felt sort of like an imposter to this author. And then they happened to be placed on the same stage together, and he sort of opened up and he said, the best way that I could probably deal with this is just to be honest. So he said, I forget what who the other author was. He goes, I feel like a real imposter around you. I just think that you're so successful, and I feel like I'm always trying to keep up, and I just wanted to tell you that. And the other guy turns to him and goes, you know what? I felt the same thing about you. And they had this this watershed moment. So, I think that transparency, like we often don't talk about our desires. We don't talk about our insecurities. And in my life, at least, being open and transparent about them has often just led to this feeling of relief and freedom when I realize that other people are just like me.
Often when I talk about productivity and I bring up Maslow's hierarchy of needs quite a bit, because I think sometimes what the primitive part of our brain, like the older part of our brain, is more than happy to stay in stage 1 and stage 2. Like, let's just survive, let's just be secure. And then when you get to like the next level 3, which is more about, like the idea of relationships, which is where I think the threshold starts to shift a little bit. Then 4 and 5, 4 is esteem, 5 is self-actualization. I'm not a big fan of saying like I have to do something. Like I need to do something, but there's a want. When does a need become a want, and when because I often bring this up to people, and when are they mutually is there a point where they become one in the same? Like need and want kind of exist together, and it's hard to kind of separate, oh, this is something that is a need of mine versus this is just something that's a desire, and I need to try to kind of unpack it a bit?
I think that it's there's a fine line, and the lines are, and it's very blurry. Many things have an element of need and desire combined. There's not like this point at which there's a clean break. One way to think about it, though, would be, here's how to identify need. If you say that you need something, like you're thirsty, and Luke, I want a glass of water, and I hand you a glass of tap water from my kitchen, and you say, well, Luke, I was really hoping that I could drink Aquafina or Voss. Well, then that's clearly not just a need. Like, if it was just a need, then you would drink whatever water I gave you to drink.
Right.
And we live in a world now where even water has become a matter of desire. We got all different kinds of brands of water that we can drink. So it seems like 500 years ago, there was probably just a lot more need for most people in the world, thinking about survival, getting enough food and drink and warmth, just to get by. In a world of abundance, especially for a lot of Americans and Canadians, we spend most of our life not spending most of our time so concerned about meeting our daily needs, and just getting overwhelmed with all of the different desires that are modeled to us from every corner of the world. Social media, we can see what people on the other side of the world are desiring and wanting. And I think we've spent a lot more time of our time in the universe of desire than we do in the universe of needs.
So let's break it down a bit. You wrote this book. Was that a need or a desire for you?
I think it was both. And the funny thing about when you feel like you have to do something, and I think a lot of creative projects feel that way, it's almost like I have to like give birth to this thing inside of me. And if I don't, I'm just going to go crazy. So it certainly felt like a need at a certain point. But there's a whole lot of desire that was involved in the first place. Like, why write a book, right? I'm sure there was a lot of mimetic desire involved in that. I could have just, done this on my own. Why publish it? So I think that desires can appear like needs, and needs can appear like desires. And sort of there's some phase transition that we go through, and just understanding and just being attentive to, when does something feel like a need, and is it really a need, or is it a desire? And sort of questioning ourselves, because we always convince ourselves that we need something. Like, that's why I've bought 99% of the things that I've ever bought in my life, is because.
Did you buy a new laptop? Did you buy one of the new Apple laptops that came out the other day?
I did, only because the one that I had a broken graphics card.
Okay.
And my graphics card broke 3 months before I heard that the new ones were coming out, and I couldn't quite bridge the gap.
Right. So it was a need, but again, like you said, like, oh, I need a new computer, and someone hands you a new computer. You're like, no. I need the new I need the new MacBook.
Why do I need a MacBook Pro with X amount of RAM? Way more than I'd probably use. Yeah.
As you go through the book, you've divided it up really into, well, I would say even 3 parts, because the tactics, you have a separate list of tactics that you kind of, so it allows people to kind of go, I want to get tactical right out of the gate. But a lot of time is spent on that power of mimetic desire. Like, I would say that, it's divided up, you look at the 8 chapters and such. How important is it for people to understand that power of mimetic desire, so that they can start to leverage it? Because again, I think that when you go through, no one really, when I started to go through the book, I'm like, I didn't realize that some of this stuff was happening. Even though I consider myself to be a pretty aware person, and I like to think that I have clarity and focus, I'm like, oh, crap, yeah. So that part of it is like, there's this stuff sneaks up on you. You're not really totally hyper aware of it. And then the second phase is, here's how you can be vigilant, right?
Exactly. Well, just to be clear, when you said you weren't able to get through it, it's not because it's so hard to read. It's because there's a lot there.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, what did I say? It's a challenging read because there is so much there. It's not because, oh my God, this book is super thick. It's not War and Peace. It's not, it's not sharing. It's like, wow, there's a lot here to unpack.
Right. Well, I spent the whole first half of the book just explaining what mimetic desire is and how it works, because I felt like I needed at least half of the book to do that before we can even get into, well, what do we do about it? How do we live in this world? So yeah, what it is and just having an awareness of it is crucial. And it's why I drive the point home for, about 150 pages. Because there's something about us that wants to kind of deny our social nature and this idea that our desires are generated and shaped largely in our relationships with other people. Like we think of ourselves as independent and autonomous, and that's a good thing. We're self-reliant, and I live most of my life like that, right? Like everything that I do, I'm gonna figure out on my own, not having been aware of all of the hidden influences that had been shaping my desire from a young age, starting with my parents. So, I was like, I can't give enough examples of this from, childhood to adolescence. I mean, high school is like hyper mimesis. You enter into high school and it's like now all of a sudden you're surrounded by people that are kind of very similar to you, and people that are more similar to us, we always are more concerned about and measure ourselves against way more than we do, people that are sort of separated from us by some kind of social space, right? Like if you ask most people who they're more jealous of, Jeff Bezos, or like the person that works with you in your office who has a similar role and maybe lives in a slightly nicer place or something like that, it's the second person for everybody, right? There's something about proximity that really matters to us. And that has everything to do with mimetic desire, because we're looking for models that help us understand what it is that we want. And if somebody is important to us and they all of a sudden start gunning for a certain job, or they want to move to a certain city, all of a sudden, that job or that city or that person that they're pursuing takes on a different value to us. It's almost like it's magically, transformed, and we perceive it differently because they want it. And that's the power of mimetic desire. And this is happening all the time. Mm-hmm. Like every second of our waking lives, we're taking in cues from social media, from our friends, from our family, from what we watch on the news. And that's why I sort of try to drill home in the whole first half of the book. Like before we can talk about this, I need to convince you that it's real.
Right. As we were talking about this, I couldn't help but think of professional wrestling. And you're like, wait, why? Hold on a second, Mike. And I think what I needed to do, because I've been a fan of pro wrestling for a long time, and I didn't really talk about it because it was kind of the thing that, and I've actually listened to a few interviews from professional wrestlers. Adam Cole is one he's a member of All Elite Wrestling, and his podcast interviews, he says, I was a wrestling geek. Like I was, I was not a wrestler, but growing up, I was a wrestling geek, and I wore wrestling t-shirts, and I was the guy that made sure everyone knew that that's what that was. I'm like, man, you must have been you would have had to really find like a few people, and I guarantee you, I would imagine at least, but it'd be a safe bet that there's people that were not wearing those wrestling t-shirts that felt the exact same way as you. And I've often said that pro wrestling fans fall on like there's a general idea of what a pro wrestling fan looks like and what a pro wrestling fan does not look like. And I don't think I fit the mold of what most people think a pro wrestling fan looks like. And I've found a couple other guys that I know, and actually several more online, that also feel the same way, but we were kind of quiet about it. When it comes to like mutual want, mutual, desire amongst a group of people, and yet there's a quietness to it. Is that something that like you see happen, and as you went through the book, that you saw happening with groups of people like, oh, I'm going to be quiet about this because yes, I feel the same way. Yes, I want the same things, but it's not mutually understood or accepted that we should feel this way or we should want these sort of things.
Yeah, we see that in relationships, even with just two people that are in sort of that are courting one another or in a romantic relationship. There's always this idea that I can't, sort of out of our insecurity, like I can't show how much I want this other person too soon. I can't come on too strong. Right. It's kind of the same. It's the same idea, just with two individuals. So when you get in groups, that of course happens until one person sort of steps forward and expresses a desire. And and I see this, one of the hats I wear is as a professor at a business school. It just takes one student to sort of speak up and challenge me and say, Professor Burgis, I don't understand what you're saying. And then pretty soon, like everybody does, there's like this cascade. So desires are contagious. That's one of the points in the book, is that we are affected by other people's desires. And they move through groups extremely quickly. And that's why consensus can form really, really quickly in a group, and can lead to mob mentality and things like that. Like, has everybody actually arrived at that conclusion through independent thinking, or did it just take somebody to express a strong desire or accuse somebody of something for us to just kind of adopt that desire on our own? So that's one of the big warnings in the book, is like, we are affected by what other people want, and we can bring a level, so we can just do like passive acceptance. And many people just go through life passively sort of accepting the circumstances that they're in. Or do we exercise our agency and our freedom and are intentional about what it is that we're giving our stamp to?
Is there a way to figure out whether something you desire, I'm asking this as a general, is the wrong thing to desire?
So up front, oftentimes there's not.
Okay.
I think part of the adventure and beauty of life is that we do have to move forward. I'll just use the word faith. We have to have some trust and move forward and take some steps. And then at some point later, we look back and we realize that, it's revealed to us kind of, that this was a fulfilling desire or not. But there are usually signs along the way,
right, if
we're paying attention. And in some cases, I think the signs are all there right up front. Like we may not have 100% confidence, but the signs are there. Mm-hmm. I've had some big decisions in my life, and they seemed like they were really hard decisions to make. I was totally torn. I have a hard time making a lot of decisions. I have menu anxiety when I go to a restaurant with my wife. We both do. But I've had like major career sort of vocational questions too, right, that seemed impossible to make. I felt totally paralyzed until I do an exercise like the deathbed exercise, where I really, as seriously as I can, put myself in that place and say, Luke, if you look back in your life, which desire, which thing would you have been sort of more satisfied to have pursued? And when I do that, all of a sudden the choice didn't look so hard anymore. It actually seemed silly that I was struggling so much with it. So there is something to be said about stepping back and gaining some perspective. And in that sense, I do think we can discern which desires are going to leave us fulfilled and which ones aren't.
You bring up the point of attention. And I think when it comes to productivity and time management, people think more about, I've got to get as much done as possible. The measurement stick of productivity is achieving a lot, but then there's a lot of people left wanting, like, did I do the right things? Like, were these the right things to do? So I'm curious, knowing the pace and cadence of what people have, and I'm going to use a generic term, like what productivity has seemed to be, which is get stuff done, get to inbox zero, do all the things. How does that impact someone's ability to pay attention to those signals of, yes, this is something that I really want, and not fall prey to, say, the power of mimetic desire that you may not want to fall prey to?
Well, what good is it to run really fast and to make a lot of progress toward a goal that's the wrong goal? Like, we talk a lot about how to achieve your goals, but not a lot about how to actually select the right goals in the first place, right? The ones that are going to leave us satisfied. I interviewed a chef in the book, Chef Sebastian Bras, who'd had 3 Michelin stars at his restaurant in France for well over a decade. And he was working so hard, he was extremely productive and maintained those stars every single year until at one point in his life, he had a wake-up call and he was like, what am I doing? I don't even want these things. And he told the Michelin guy just not to come back to his restaurant. He said, I don't even care about your stars anymore.
I remember that story.
Took him a long time. It's 2018. So for me, in my life, I've had to be, maybe this isn't the right way to say this, but I've had to be unproductive before I can be productive. Or another way to say that would be, I need to sort of step back, engage in some silence, I would call it productive silence. Okay. It's like, it's the setup. It's the, even if it's the quiet 5 minutes that you spend with your coffee in the morning as you think about your day, not just jumping straight into the productivity. It's sort of that essential step. And I try to take at least 1 week every year. I've been doing it for about 10 years now, where I take a silent retreat. But there are micro ways to do that too, where we want to make sure that our productivity is going in the right direction, leading us to where we want to go. And there has to be some I'll just call it non-productive sort of reflection to check our productivity and to make sure it's the kind that we want to be doing.
As you made your way through the book and you went through the process of writing it, of course, we get to the second part, which is like, here's how you can tackle this. The tactics that you came up with and that you discuss in the book, which one was the one that you were perhaps most surprised by, that you're like, oh, this is the one that I think will do more good than I initially thought. This one might be maybe more impactful than I initially would have given it credit for.
The one that affected me the most and that I've gotten the most feedback on is the tactic that is about telling stories of deeply fulfilling action from your life. And before you can tell those stories, you just have to remember those stories. And that's easier said than done. Our memories are very fickle. Mine is fickle. Like I forget the times in my life when I was engaged in deeply fulfilling things. Like it's easier for me to remember some of the bad stuff, actually. That's like self-sabotage. Like why is it easier for you to remember the trauma and the negative experiences than it was like the really good ones? We don't do that enough. We don't ask each other about those things. So it almost requires an intentional effort to go back through our lives and to mine our lives for those times, and everybody has them, when we were engaged in a state of flow, when we were at peak productivity, when we lost track of time, we were doing something that was deeply satisfying, that brought us this deep sense of joy. It doesn't have to be a huge professional accomplishment. It could be a dinner you made for your spouse. It could be anything. Pay attention to those things. And the reason that that's a tactic in the book is because this has to do with separating the highly mimetic, fleeting, what I call thin desires from the thick desires, like the kinds of things that have probably been important to you for a long time, maybe your whole life, that perhaps you've forgotten. So when I went through this exercise and I had a wise mentor that sort of did it with me, it just like revealed a lot of things about myself that I sort of like pretended like I knew, but I didn't really have the language to explain them. And that storytelling exercise was absolutely instrumental. And since the book came out, I've walked a couple of dozen people through the same exercise, and not a single one of them has told me that they didn't learn some surprising thing about their deeper desires that they'd probably lost touch with.
Considering what you just told me, do you journal? Do you keep a journal now? Like knowing how your memory is and knowing how valuable that tactic is journaling something you do? And I know I do. I think it's a worthwhile thing because of the very thing you mentioned. Here's a stupid thing that I really thought was cool, and I want to make sure I don't forget it. James Gunn has that new Peacemaker series that's coming out. And I know this maybe seem like trivial and silly. And I just shared the song because I found it on Spotify. And I said, thanks for the earworm, James Gunn. And he replied to me on Twitter, said, right? And I'm like, that was a cool moment. I want to remember that moment. Yes, it's a completely vapid, vain thing, but that would get lost in the annals of my memory, or it would act as a prompt to also discuss what else happened during the day that I might otherwise not have paid too much attention to. So is journaling something that you believe in? And even to that end, journaling about something as vain or silly as, wow, a celebrity retweeted me or replied to my tweet. Do you think that that's an exercise that would be worthwhile to further or, tap into this idea of, hey, there's more to this than just that. And let me talk more about the story of my day as opposed to this single tweet that happened.
Absolutely. Well, I don't think there's anything too trivial to note and record. If it's on your mind and you're thinking about writing it down, that means you need to write it down.
Oh, I love that.
There's nothing too trivial, right? It's on your mind for a reason.
Yep.
And you need to get it out. We write so that we can forget sometimes.
Yep.
Somebody said that, I forget who. But yes, the answer is yes, I do. And I've never been very good at it. I'm not the most disciplined person in the world. My writings, people ask me about my writing method. Like, how did you write a book like this? Man, it is way less disciplined than anybody realized. But for years, I just took massive amounts of notes in my iPhone because that was just the way that worked for me. And I was like, this is a mess. Then I finally had a friend who came out with a great product called the Monk Manual, who sent me one, and I've been using the Monk Manual now for a while.
I have it.
Yeah.
I love the Monk Manual. I use it. Yeah, it's fantastic.
So it's a fantastic tool, and Steve Lawson, who's the founder of the Monk Manual, and I have talked about developing a version of it, like sort of a desire journal. So I think it's really important to keep track of what you want. I mean, this sounds like a silly thing, right? But like, if you understand the way that your desires have changed over the course of a week or a year, that's really important information. Like last month, the only thing on my mind was moving to Austin, which everybody seems to want to do these days. But now it's not. Like, that desire is gone. Well, what does that tell me about that desire? Maybe there was some sort of mimetic factors involved. Who was in my life at that time? Oh, it's because my entrepreneur friend was staying with me that week, and that's all he talked about was Austin. And then you can begin to sort of refine and understand why you want different things in different seasons of your life or different times of the year. So before you go and make a big career change or something like that, you can sort of track, well, wow, I've been wanting to get out of this industry every single day for the last year. Or I only journaled about that in January and I haven't journaled about it since. So maybe I don't really want to do, so I think that's an important part of the equation. So I'd encourage anybody that does journal is be super honest. I mean, just note every day, like, what did I want most out of this day when I woke up, and what did I want when I went to bed? That's a simple way to get started.
It's you bring up Austin. There's so much that I want to talk about here before we wrap up. So you bring up Austin, which brings.
I'm not trying to knock. No, I'm not. No. Knocking Austin. It's an easy target.
No, but you also brought up the Monk Manual. So I actually every night I go through the Monk Manual. I also journal in an app called Reflection.app by the guys who made the Whole Steam Manifesto, which I really like because it's an easy thing for anything you can do to remove the friction from that. I think is powerful because not everybody's going to sit down and write it out. But I have the Monk Manual. And I have my daily driver, which I use for my own, because, I have my own productivity stuff that I do. But I have what's called the evening examination, which I do every night to kind of reflect. And that comes, why am I mentioning Austin? How does this all connect to Austin? Because Ryan Holiday lives in Austin, and it's a very stoic, like the Stoics did this evening examination. Well, back to wanting, the Stoics really tried to keep that out of their purview. So is adopting some of those reasoned approaches to things, because I think that's really what Stoicism comes down to is it's the delicate balance between emotion and logic, right? Where you have to try to kind of navigate it to a certain degree. If someone is thinking in terms of reason and that will, I think, help them against this, power that of mimetic desire. But I wonder what your thoughts are on that ideology of Stoicism and leveraging that in that case, because I know that Ryan has talked about Stoicism. I mean, it's speaking of career change, man, like he didn't start there, but boy, oh boy, has he gone down there, and it's been a great journey, a great ride to read and watch.
Yeah. Well, so Ryan and I had a great chat about this on his podcast, and I think that Stoicism has a lot to offer. But I mean, that idea of an evening examination also is a long-standing spiritual tradition, right, going all the way back to the Desert Fathers in Egypt, and even before that, probably long before that. But at least in Christianity, it goes all the way back to them. So it's really important. But there's only reason can get us so far, and then there's a certain point where discernment has to come into play, and sometimes desires have to be discerned, right? We can't use reason alone necessarily to know, who we should marry, for instance, right, or something like that, right? There are some things in life where we have to discern our desires. Like, where is this desire coming from? What's my motivation here? requires radical honesty with ourselves. Look, reason can come into play with questions like that too, right? I mean, there are some things that would just be like stupid to pursue for just very rational reasons because they'll kill me or something. But all else being equal, discerning desires and understanding where they come from and what's motivating us, I think is a layer deeper. And it's a layer that I think we can add to that I do an evening examination too. So it's a layer down that I can go, like at the end of the day. So I want this thing. I want to pursue this new, book idea or something like that. Why? What am I looking for, right? Is it because I want to be the next Ryan Holiday, or is it because I have this, that's how I think. Writing actually helps me understand the topic more, or something else, whatever. And if I can answer that question, then I've arrived at some discernment of where that desire is, where it's coming from, and if it's ultimately going to fulfill me. Because if it's to try to start a podcast and be more like Ryan Holiday, is going to make me miserable.
Yeah, it's empty calories, right?
Exactly.
Before we wrap up, Luke, I want to ask, I tend to ask this to every guest as we wrap up each conversation, because I want the listener to walk away with something actionable that they can do, like something tactical. And lo and behold, there's a whole section on tactics here that you can kind of go through. So if someone is going to, they pick up the book or they listen to this conversation, they're like, okay, Luke, I'm ready. What's one simple action I can take today that's going to help me, with this idea of mimetic desire and either leveraging the power or recognizing it or, keeping it at bay? What's one simple action they can take today to get started on that path?
Simple thing you can do is take one sheet of paper and name 10 of your models, 10 people that influence what you want. And this is a really hard exercise. And you're going to divide the paper into two sections. One section, the top half, are going to be for people that influence your desire that are outside of your world, okay? These could be people that you don't have daily contact with, people that are dead, people that are famous. These are external models of desire, okay? So growing up, Michael Jordan was a huge model of desire for me. I wanted to play basketball, but I'm only 5'9", but he would be an example of somebody that's in that external model of desire box, right? Try to find 5 of those. Those are going to be probably pretty easy to find, if you're honest. People that affect what you want. They could be people in business, right? So I'm an entrepreneur. Steve Jobs affects what I want a company to be like, something like that. And then the other half of the paper are internal models of desire. These are people that are inside of your world. They're people that you have the possibility of coming into contact with, maybe not daily, but at least at some point. They could be friends, they could be family, colleagues, it'd be people on social media. People that you do come into contact with people on social media, right? We can interact with one another. And those are typically a little bit harder to admit, but they're people that influence our desire. So these are the models of desire that are in the world that I call freshmanistan in the book, because it seems like we live in a world these days, we're all kind of freshmen again, at least with social media. Yeah. So that's one exercise. And if you can identify those 10, and the ways in which they affect what you want. Maybe somebody that wants to move to Austin, I don't know. You'll begin to have a little bit better grip on what's influencing you, and then you can exercise your agency and decide if you want to lean into those desires or not.
The book is called Wanting: The Power of Mimetic Desire in Everyday Life. Luke, again, I'm making my way through it, and there's so much gold here. Where can people pick up the book and keep up with your work?
Thanks so much, Mike. You can pick up the book anywhere books are sold, from what I understand. Hopefully your local bookshop has it. If they don't, please tell them to order it. You can find it online, and I write at lukeburgis.com. I publish a Substack at least once a week, so you can check me out there too.
Luke, thanks for having a productive conversation with me today.
Thanks so much, Mike. Appreciate it.
Big thanks to Luke for joining me on the program today. I've wanted to have that conversation for a long time. The roots of time crafting are found in the ideas of needing to do, wanting to do, all that stuff. So the fact that wanting was something we could dive into was really special for me. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, I encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. It's very easy to do. All you need to do in wherever you're listening to this podcast is hit the subscribe button. That way, if you want, to listen to past episodes easier, you can. You'll be able to scroll through those archives and find conversations with Seth Godin, Chris Bailey, David Allen, Gretchen Rubin, Annie Duke, many, many more. There's over 400 episodes in the archives, but you also won't miss a single episode of what's to come, including next week, where I speak with Michael Dietrich Chastain. We're going to talk about changes and change, and it's going to be a really great conversation. I can't wait to share it with you. By the way, the other thing you can do, if you want to get deeper into the conversation that Luke and I had, you can go to the blog post that's associated with this episode. All you need to do is go to productivityist.com/podcast 409. You'll find everything you need there. Finally, you want to support the show even further? Check out the sponsors, not only the ones you heard on this episode today, who I'm very thankful for, but also some of the previous sponsors we've had. Just head to productivityist.com/podcast sponsors to check them out. And if you check out those sponsors from that page, they'll know I sent you. That's it for this time around. Thanks for joining me on A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.